My hometown is Portland. I was born here and have always lived here except for the time I was in the service. The first band I played in was the Federal Cigar Jug Band, and it was started with some college friends from the Portland State Art Department. Everyone except Bill Boslow, who we met because we all worked at the same place also, which was the Oregon Historical Society in a work-study program. It was late '65 that we started to think about it, and then early '66 by the time we were really playing as a band. It probably took me a year to figure out just what to do with the washboard, but I think there were others there in the band who really pushed us along. Bill was really the formative person who inspired us to play this music. He introduced us to it. He had discovered it himself when he worked for Vista in New York City. He was in the Lower East Side, and he was along Bleecker Street at the time that all of this began happening, and saw Jim Kweskin Jug Band and all the other music there as it was just exploding in the late '64, '65 period. Primarily where we would meet was at work at the Historical Society. We would get together during the lunch hour and play out in the park blocks when we could. We didn't always weren't able to do that, but those first few months of learning the music and getting to know each other and just having fun as kids, really, I think is probably the most memorable part of being in the band. The original jug band, the Federal Cigar, there were only four of us. There was Bill Boslow, our founder, and Ernest Goebel, Ernie Goebel now calls himself, and Jerry Ballantyne, and that was the college four. And then we had one younger fellow whose name was Hoot Hagston, and he joined us because he could also play the guitar, and he was a high school kid that I knew because I was dating a girl across the street from him. Hoot played the guitar. Jerry Ballantyne played banjo because we already had Hoot as a guitar player, and Ernie also played the guitar, but he played the mandolin. Ernie is the most versatile of the musicians of us. And Bill played washtub bass, and I played a washboard because I had no musical background whatsoever. Not even a Jaws harp or a kazoo. As I mentioned earlier, we were all in the art department, and I had a cigar box that I kept drawing materials in, pencils and charcoals and erasers and so on. And we were sitting in my little art room one evening, talking about music and trying to come up with a name for this band. And I happened to look over at the cigar box, and it had this beautiful calligraphy logo on it, and it was called the Federal Cigar. And it had a nice graphic on it, a strong female graphic, and called Red Dot. And we thought about calling ourselves the Red Dot Jug Band, but that was just too weird. It seemed much more logical to call it the Federal Cigar Jug Band. I don't know why, but we all agreed on it, and we were not drinking. We had not smoked anything. We were just sitting around, but they all said, "Well, yeah, the Federal Cigar Jug Band. That's it," and so it is, and has been since 1965. In the first few months and first year, we played primarily in coffee houses around Portland. There was one across from Portland State called the Agora Coffee House, and we played there, and we played at Portland State. We played at the bookstore, and sometimes there were parties primarily from people from the Portland State Art Department. And there was a couple artists from the department. I had a studio over on Powell, and we would play at parties there quite often. It was really almost a jug band for the art department because that was all the people who we knew and all the people who knew us. So this was probably our first gig with an audience. We played at a coffee house down on, I think it was called Front Avenue then, but it might be called NATO Parkway now. And this coffee house was called Queen Mary's, and she had asked us to come down and play. It was in an industrial building down there, and it was pretty primitive, but it was also an art studio. And one of the artists had made this little statue here that Bill's holding. This is Bill Boslow. This is Hoot Haigston, Ernie Goebel, Jerry Ballantyne, and myself leaning on the washboard. Later on, we got together frequently at Ernie's house, same crew. By this time, we'd asked Jerry to play the banjo because, as you saw in the earlier photo, we had 3 guitars and that was plenty. There was one coffee house called the New Folk Singer where most of the jug bands played. Another was called the Cafe, I think it's Cafe Orpheus, or it might have been Cafe, boy, at that time it might have been called Cafe Acid. I can't remember, but New Folk Singer was on Burnside at about 23rd or so, northwest. The one that I can't get through, it had, Cafe Espresso. That was what it was called. And it was near Portland State. I'm thinking about Park and 9th. Before Portland State got so large, it was a big university. It was still Portland State College at that time and pretty small, 4 buildings. And there were other coffees. And the one I mentioned earlier, the Agora Coffee House. Anyway, there were several coffee houses around. That's where we played. One of the places that the band played was what was called the foyer in the art department of Portland State, and here are 3 of the band members playing during the period that I was not in the band but was in the Navy. And this is Bob Bailey, who joined the band then, and this is what the Washboard looked like at that time. And that's Jerry Ballantyne on the kazoo and banjo, and Bill Boslow. Bob played banjo and washboard and brought a lot of new perspective into the band and really helped it grow. I think the first high-profile jam or gig that we had was for a political rally for McCarthy in 1966 or 67. That happened while I was in the Navy, so I wasn't part of that. Here's the poster that Bob Bailey made for that. Bob is quite an accomplished graphic designer, and he made that for the event. He also did some for dances and other things where the bands played. You'd have to be in a different state of mind, I think, to read this. But the Federal Cigar is listed right there at the top of this one. And this one you really would have to hold in your hand and study to see the names of the bands in there. But there are about 3 Portland bands that were playing at a place called the Pythian, which was a big dance hall back in the 60s. What were some of the early songs we played? Minglewood was one, Wild About My Lovin', She Ain't Got No. We tried to find songs that had double entendre so we could have a little fun with the audience too. So there were songs like that. Summertime, we did some songs that weren't jug band. We did, maybe it would be easier to say who we were copying. We played, of course, Jim Kweskin was a big influence, so we took a lot of his songs. And some of the early jug bands, Memphis Jug Band was a big a big influence. Going to German, Gus Cannon, and Whitewash Station. We picked them up wherever we could find a good one. And Bill really often gave us the song list. He said, here's the songs we need to learn. And we ended up with many more than I can remember the titles for. Because Bill had such a huge record collection, he would, as we got into the digital age, he would send us MP3s and we would learn them that way, or he'd bring a record to a jam or a practice session and he'd pick one. He came in one day with Downtown Blues, which I think Muldar was singing, and we thought, wow, that's a great song because it had some rock and roll roots to it. So we picked that one up. It was primarily Bill. Again, he was our source. He put together a set of 4 CDs for us of roots music from his collection, which is the 4 CDs in their own right are valuable now because they are such a compendium of roots in one package. So it was really Bill that got us the music. If we found albums, I found an album in a record store in San Diego that was focused on folk music in 1967 when I was stationed there, and I met some people who were playing jug band and other music, but the person who had the record store had a section that was just jug band, and I got one that was a collection of jug band called The Roots of Jug Band, and I picked that up, and I had that for a long time, but I finally gave it to Bill for his collection. But that's what we did, was we would shop record stores and pick them up where we could, Bill in particular. What I remember about other jug bands in Portland is a fun question. The first one we were aware of was the PH Factor. They were just such a wild, funny bunch, and they really interpreted jug band in a way that different from the way the Federal Cigar was trying to work on it. But they were before us, so we really looked at them as sort of as our leader. Just funny guys and very, very talented. Barefoot John Hendricks was incomparable and funny and very talented. There was another one that I can't even spell the name for. It was called the Sajmoli Jug Band, and the only name I remember from that one is Stewie Dodge. But again, just fun music. But those are the only jug bands that I was aware of at that time, Sajmoli and PH Factor, and the Factor was so big. I'm not sure anybody else was confident enough to try to come up against them. Yeah, they were the ones we wanted to see. They were the ones we wanted to be, honestly. Jerry Ballantyne moved away sometime while I was in the Navy. He went to, well, he was a sailor and he went off to sail, and then he worked up off a ship in Alaska. So the band sort of began to spread after about 1968. We were all out of college by that time. People were building new lives, and it just kind of stopped. When I came out of the Navy, the band really wasn't getting together anymore. That was 1969. And then nothing happened that I know about. Maybe they all got together without me. But nothing happened until about 1990, and I was just listening to some Queskin and some old jug band stuff that I'd picked up while I was in the Navy. And I thought, I've just got to do this. I've got to play this music. And so I called everybody and I said, the Federal Cigar Jug Band is getting together on Friday night at my house, and you need to be there. And they all showed up, and we laughed and we had a good time, and we were amazed that we all remembered the music after 10 years. Many of us had not seen each other during that time. Bill and Bob lived close together, so they stayed more in touch. But really, we were pretty scattered by that, by 1991 or so. But somebody said, well, what song should we play? And Bill said, Bill said, we have to do a song that starts with, well now, and we all knew that song. She ain't got no, yes she does, no she don't. And that's the way that song starts, and that's what got us going again. And then we played off and on just whenever we could get together. But again, it was harder and harder to get together because as we moved into careers, time got tighter, people moved, got transferred and so on. But along about, let's see, I think there's a date on this. Yes, 2003. We were, Bob Bailey had arranged for us to play at the Carnegie Library, not Carnegie Hall, the Carnegie Library in Oregon City. I think that Bob Bailey lived in Oregon City, and I think he set that gig up. And somehow the Oregonian got a notice of it, and they published a big article about the band playing for the first time in blah, 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 so many years. And we went out to the library thinking, oh, this will be fun. And the place was packed. There were about 200 people there. We never played for an audience that large. And it was really probably the most fun and the largest gig we ever played, being promoted as a remnant from the 60s, which we still are, I guess. But we continue to play even now, even in our reduced state, which is down to 3 or 4 people. We have a woman who joined us very late, and she sings, and that's Susan Sailing, and she's got a wonderful voice for jug band. With the loss of Bill, and then the loss of Hoot too, lost 2 people, 2 very important members of the band. What we have left is not enough to play any gigs, so we don't do that. We just get together and play once in a while for a jam. It might be once a month. We still just stayed with jug band. Once in a while there'd be a country western or something we'd hear or say, that's a fun song. And If I Lose is one of those that came up. And let's see, there was one about a black motorcycle, Greased Lightning or Black Lightning, or I'm sorry, I can't remember that one. You can scratch that part. But it's a good guitar song, and Ernie does it. This is the washboard that I used. The original washboard in the band, we have pictures of it, but it disappeared over the years, and no one knows what happened to that washboard. Bob started playing washboard, and while I was gone, and he sort of took over washboard duties because he's a very good washboard player, much better than I was. But I still have the washboard that I put together when we got together in 1990. And you can see my limited repertoire. I've got a cowbell and a scratchboard, and that's about as far as I can go with music. So, and I did this little sort of, I don't know, throwback kind of style for the title on it. It says, at the bottom, it says, "The Federal Cigar, now more than ever."
Is there a story behind that?
I can say a lot about Bill Boslow. He was one of my dearest friends, and it still breaks my heart that he's gone. He left way too soon. He got a very serious illness, and we just lost him. But he collected one of the largest, I think, largest collections of original 78 material on the OK label in this country. and he was nationally known and contacted by other collectors around the country. He got a phone call one afternoon from Jacob Dylan saying, "Have you got a copy of such and such and such and such?" And he did, and they made a trade. He knew all the history of the jug bands, all of the jug bands. I mean, the ones going back to the very first jug bands in Memphis. If you could ask him anything about jug bands and roots music and or records. I was looking for a record that I'd had when I was a child, which was not a jug band record. I asked him for it by title and performer, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've got one of those." And he brought it to our next jam, and he's just. He was generous, and he was open, and he was knowledgeable. And others in the band have said this too. Probably the single most influential person in my life, because he taught me jug band music, and he allowed me to explore the guitar and eventually learned sort of to play the guitar. The influence of this music has been lifelong. We've been together since 1965, which is an incredible time, a long time for a band to stay together with the basic people that were there. The only way we have lost people from the band is through death. And I think that we will still be getting together as long as we can do it. As long as there is two of us to get together, we will play jug band music, and we will be the Federal Cigar Jug Band. So I had this hat, and it started because I wore it one time to a jazz folk festival up in Port Townsend, Washington, where a lot of the early Roots guys who are still alive were performing, and it's a real social event, and I was wearing the hat, and I wanted some autographs of these people, and I didn't have any paper. All I had was a hat. So I started going around and asking them to please sign, and there's John Jackson, Phil Wiggins, let's see, Howard Armstrong, Louie Bluey, he was known as, and I've protected this particular signature because it's so neat. But anyway, subsequently I thought, okay, I'm just going to have everybody I ever meet sign this who has anything to do with jug band music. So I was able to get, among others, Fritz Richmond, Susie Thompson, Jim Kweskin, Maria Muldaur, Steve James, Dave Grissman, let's see, John Sebastian, there's probably some others in here that I can't find. It's pretty well scribbled over the years. Whenever I have been able to corner some local or some famous, or even some famous locals, I get them to sign it. Funny you should ask what's in here now. This is a drawing my father did when he was about 20. He thought he was going to be an artist when he grew up, but he never made it. As for what's left in here, there's some poker chips, mahjong piece. I don't know why these things are in here. I can't explain it. There are a bunch of bullets used. I can't tell you any more about that. I don't know. This just showed up. But it's been around for a long time, so who knows?